the fact that this is now the most expensive primary in the history of American politics, and of course it happens in the Democratic Party, the party that claims to be for working people. So no surprise there that that's where this is happening. The hypocrisy knows no bounds. But please tell us how things are looking, why it's gotten this out of control, and is there still hope for the grassroots game that so many of us have invested a lot of our time and effort and, frankly, our lives in?
Joe, you're going to take this one.
Okay. I mean, it started with AIPAC, right? It's a simple fact. Jamaal Bowman had some stances that they didn't like. Matter of fact, they attack anybody who doesn't 100% agree with them. So Republican or Democrat. And the strange thing is AIPAC is an organization that backs most of the people who supported the insurrection and is well funded by Republican donors. And they went out and they sought somebody within Congressman Bowman's district, which is George Latimer. He's the executive of the county there. And, they're like, who do we get to run against him? And so they picked George specifically to, primary Bowman and get him out of there. So, and if you ever listen to Jamaal Bowman, I know some people don't totally agree with everything he says, but he does represent the working class in his district. He was a high school. He was a principal. He started a school in the Bronx. He did really good work there before he became a congressman, and and he served the district as best he can. And he took on an incumbent, I think a 20-year incumbent when he primaried, who was a no-show, who never showed up in his own district. And he's done a lot of good work for people of District 16.
I just want to interrupt for a second, Joe.
Please.
About his principalship. Jamaal came to NIPAN several years ago when he first was looking to run, and he made a case for himself. I'll just tell you the thing that really struck me as an educator was when he said not only did he help build the school, he was the first principal of the School of Social Change, which was designed for middle school kids, 6th grade to 8th grade. He said, as principal, I want to teach them the good, bad, and ugly of U.S. history. So dissent to me is important. So he says, as principal, I got power. He says, I shut down the school 4 times a year just to do protests. That won me over. As a history teacher, I know the good, bad, and ugly of our history. And you need to protest. So that same core group of students, 6 years later, became the core of his campaign staff, along with working with the Sunrise Movement. So I found that to be a really amazing thing about the person himself. Now I'll go back to Joe because he was doing a great job, and as usual, I interrupt my friend.
How do you get an Italian to stop talking? You tie their hands behind their back. That's what
this is true. I'll do my best.
Well, I think the second part of your question is how is the grassroots doing compared to what's being there. I mean, I can tell you right now. I hopped into my car today, and there was an ad against Bowman, praising Latimer. It was paid by some group. Was in Latimer's campaign. Radio ads, television ads. They praise Latimer as if he's some sort of progressive. Progressive is a term that's bandied around as if it's like a magical thing. You have that label and you're automatically a progressive, when reality is a lot of times you don't even hold any progressive policies. And it's hard to start. I kind of find it hard to use that term sometimes because the people who use it, like Cuomo or Mayor Adams, Governor Hochul, I think, has said that too. They've said it, but then they've also walked back using that term. So calling yourself progressive means nothing. It's what your actions are. And so they're praising Latimer as some progressive, and that he's. And really what he's done, if he's done anything for his county, is the bare minimum of what someone on the left should be doing, and then totally attacked Bowman as if he was the boogeyman, as if he was a Republican, as an alt-right conservative. And that's the type of stuff we're seeing here. So there's a lot of money being spent. And the tough part is when you have that much money being spent on ads and radio and television, you're touching those voters. And you need a tremendous, campaign infrastructure to knock doors against that. So the struggle is real, because you've got to go out there and you've got to hit every door that you can to have a conversation. And those conversations do move voters, those face-to-face conversations. I think anybody who's running a campaign understands that is probably the most important conversation you can have, a face-to-face conversation with the voter. But it's hard to get a lot of volunteers out there to do that.
It is.
Yeah.
And we're dealing with the same problem here in South Florida, even though we do have a wonderful team that's helping Jen on the ground against Wasserman Schultz. But at the end of the day, it is the summertime, which is the toughest time to get people to canvass. And as Tella, and I want to get you in here, Tella, can definitely attest to, climate change is real, no matter how much you want to pretend it isn't. And I also would like to get your opinion about the race right now, because I am not somebody who buys. I think people get overly dramatic about certain elements of the political arena. I think some people tend to use, certain issues when it comes to race and culture as political footballs. They don't actually care. They don't actually address the issues at bar that really matter. It is pretty safe to say, in my general observation of Councilman Latimer, who is trying to become the congressman, he is a bigot. There is no getting around it. The language he uses when it comes to natives, when it comes to Muslims, when it comes to the Black community, he's really letting it fly. It's almost to the point now where he just doesn't care, because I think in a way he thinks he has it in the bag, which may be a very big mistake on his part. But can you talk about your perspective in still in observing this particular type of race, and how this is a race between basically the working class Bronx versus the affluent suburbs in Westchester County? It seems pretty direct at this point. Am I missing anything, or do you see it the same way?
Yeah, it's really unfortunate when we see that kind of adversity in the political landscape. My nation is out on the east end of Long Island, so we deal with, all types of different people. We have people who don't know that Native people still exist on Long Island, and yet we're dealing firsthand with the effects of climate change. We live in the largest unsewered district in the entire United States, so we're literally suffering from billionaires' wastes polluting our water, destroying our way of life, and we're fighting for real elements of survival. And so it becomes very real, and it becomes very moving to want to get people engaged in making a difference and standing up for what's right, rather than the jargon or these types of politics that are based in bias and racism. There are so many real issues that we have to deal with today, that it's really important and critical that we can stick to things that are truly important and benefit all of us, like clean water, clean air, and other essential things that are going to help all future generations survive. So we always are motivated politically to activate to protect those things and support those candidates who have those interests in mind.
Amen. Couldn't have said it better. Marco, your thoughts?
Just touching on your point about the state of grassroots activism and political activity. I mean, it's very disheartening when you see the amount of money that can just avalanche a progressive campaign. Anybody that is even remotely left of Bernie Sanders, whether you saw it in Buffalo, you saw it try to be done in Philadelphia. I mean, everywhere every time that there's a big wave of elections, and I also, to echo what Joe is saying, absolutely hate the co-opting the progressive means someone who is who supports a certain kind of policy, certain types of policies, and it just becomes like a marketing term that you just have to have in your flyers, in your radio commercials, because it is popular. It is a popular thing. Progressive policies are popular. Just everything that FDR and really Henry Wallace fought for is just everything that's been eroded in the last, since the 40s. So I'm actually in Long Island activist. I'm not going to say I'm a pariah, but I really don't have any faith in electoral politics whatsoever. I think that time is better spent organizing labor and organizing workplaces and doing that kind of activity, because we have a dictatorship of duopoly. We have two parties that serve the same master in industry and in business, the banks, the big, so I don't expect change to come through the route that the oppressor class has set forth for the working class. I just don't see that. It doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, why would if I was in power, I'll give you the illusion of choice, but I'm not going to give you actual change. If I'm in power, and it's so absolute, because wealth is concentrated at the top. And that is it. That's the game, dog. Like, that's it. That's where we're at. Like, now it's like, I can't fight this avalanche of money. It takes so much out of your heart, to when you see that, when you go,
Sure.
Ooh, they're just throwing money behind a candidate. Who's heard of Latimer? Like, who knows who his family doesn't? They just found out he's running for whatever for District 16. So
I definitely agree with you that the avalanche of money is a very big problem, and everybody chooses to play their given circumstances differently. In Bowman's case, which is I think just a reflection of why he even still has a reasonable shot at winning, is because it's very difficult to take out an incumbent, especially if you're an incumbent who is actually trying to serve the community in a positive way. Those relationships get built and they become a lot more solidified, because people will put boots on the ground, they'll put money into a race. They don't need to put that type of an avalanche into a political cause. The problem with AIPAC is that it is predominantly funded by some of the most affluent people in the country and around the world. And
also, how is that not how is that not election interference?
Well,
how are we looking at all these characters at Richie Torres and all these people that are just advocating ferociously for Israel? I'm like, hold on, Richie Torres in particular, you are the representative of the poorest congressional district in the country, and you're supporting sending money abroad? How does he walk through his district is actually probably a pretty good question. Does he visit the community he represents?
Well, this also gets back to the whole issue, pertaining to, social justice politics, which I think is extremely overrated, because if you're not framing it from the perspective of labor, which is really where it begins and ends, then all you're doing is just masquerading as somebody who actually is just doing it for their own political benefit.
But you know why, right?
Oh, well, of course, everything's
because
about money.
If you separate the African American struggle against law enforcement and the LGBTQ struggle and just regular working class struggle and the immigrant struggle, if you separate those things, it's much easier to. I work with very, very marginalized folks, and they are not. They consume current affairs in a very passive way, mostly because of the struggles of their day-to-day. That's probably all. If they engage with current affairs, then it's at a very, very like surface level. And I hear it all the time. Well, oh, these immigrants get this. Why are immigrants getting that? When I can't get housing. And I reiterate to them that the system of oppression that pushed a Venezuelan out of Venezuela is the same system of oppression that suppresses all of our wages, unless any of us are independently wealthy. In that case, you got dinner next. But unless you're somehow miraculously, in a it sounds like it was you, Bobby, teasing. But you know, it's if you're in the struggle like everybody else, like that has to be presented. Especially Democrats that frame it in such a separatist manner within the marginalized communities of this country, they're being dishonest and are actually are undermining the greater struggle.